There we go. Oops. There we go. All right. Let's see, Facebook. Facebook's firing up. All right. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Getting Facebook shared out. Oh, dear. Oh. There we go. All right, everybody, welcome to the stream. All right, we're starting. Oh man, I forgot my phone for a second. I couldn't even share the stream out. We're back. Good morning from Kansas. How's Kansas doing? Good morning. Houston, Texas. Good morning. 4 hours of sleep. Yep, I'm adjusting to this schedule too. It's a brand new one. Morning update and evening update now. Hey, Wendy. Hey, Wendy, how you doing? Check on into the stream. Hello, Matt. Good morning. Good morning, Matt. You guys here? There we go. Good morning from United Kingdom. B. Hugh, good morning. Good morning. All right. We have Zelensky speaking now. So we'll have to catch up anything that we missed too, huh? Comment in the Discord. Do we have the link to that? Happening now. Thank you. All right, let's hop to it.
That is what we are interested in.
Maximum right into it,
access for journalists, maximum cooperation with international institutions, involvement of the International Criminal Court, complete truth and full accountability. I'm sure that every member state of the UN should be interested in this. For what? In order to punish once and for all those who consider themselves privileged and believe that they can get away with anything. So show all the other potential war criminals in the world how they will be punished. If the biggest one is punished, then everyone is punished. Why did Ukraine come to Ukraine? I will tell you, because Russia's leadership feels like colonizers. In ancient times, they need our wealth, our people. Russia has already deported hundreds of thousands of our citizens to their country. They abducted more than 2,000 children, just simply conducted those children and continue to do so. Russia wants to turn Ukraine into silent slaves. The Russian military are looting openly the cities and villages that they have captured. This is wide-scale looting. They are stealing everything, starting with food, ending with earrings, gold earrings that are pulled out and covered with blood. We are dealing with a state that is turning the veto into the UN Security Council into the right to die. This undermines the whole architecture of global security. It allows them to go unpunished. So they are destroying everything that they can. So if this continues, the countries will rely only on the power of their own arms to ensure their security, and not on international law, not rely on international institutions. The United Nations can be simply closed. Ladies and gentlemen, are you ready to close the UN? Do you think that the time of international law is gone? If your answer is no, then you need to act immediately. The UN charter must be restored immediately. The UN system must be reformed immediately so that the veto is not the right to die, that there is a fair representation in the Security Council of all regions of the world. The aggressor must be brought to peace immediately. Determination is needed. The massacre from Syria to Somalia, from Afghanistan to Yemen and Libya, that should have been stopped long time ago, to tell you the truth.
Ooh.
If tyranny had at least once received such a response to the war it had waged, it would have ceased to exist, and honest peace had been guaranteed after it, and the world would have changed for sure. And then perhaps there would not be war in my country against our people, against Ukrainian people, against our citizens. But the world watched and did not want to see it, either the occupation of Crimea or the war against Georgia or taking the entire Transnistria from Moldova, and how Russia was preparing the basis for other conflicts and wars near their borders. How to stop it? Right away, the Russian military and those who gave them orders must be brought to justice immediately for war crimes in Ukraine. Anyone who has given criminal orders and carried out them by killing our people will be brought before the tribunal, which should be similar to the Nuremberg tribunals. I would like to remind Russian diplomats that a man like von Ribbentrop has not escaped punishment for crimes in World War II. I would also like to remind you that Adolf Eichmann also did not go unpunished. Nobody of them escaped the punishment. But the main thing is today is it's time to transform the system, the United Nations. So therefore, I propose to convene a global conference, and we can do it here in peaceful Kyiv in order to determine how we are going to reform the world security system, how we will rely, how do we establish guarantee of recognition of borders and integrity of states and countries, how we will assert the rule of international law. It is now clear that the goals set in San Francisco in 1945 for the creation of a global security international organization have not been achieved, and it is impossible to achieve them without reforms. Therefore, we must do everything in our power to pass on to the next generation an effective UN with the ability to respond preventively to security challenges and thus guarantee peace, prevent aggression, and force aggressors to peace, have the determination and ability to punish if the principles of peace are violated. There can be no more exceptions or privileges. Everybody must be equal. All participants of international relations, regardless of economic strength, geographical area, and individual ambitions. The power of peace must become dominant. The power of justice and the security power, as humanity has always dreamed of it. Ukraine is ready to provide a platform for one of the main offices of the newly updated security system, as similar to the Geneva office that deals with human rights, and Nairobi office that deals with environmental protection. And in Kyiv, we can have U24 office that can specialize in preventive measures to maintain peace. I would like to remind you of our peaceful mission in Afghanistan, when we, Ukrainians, evacuated from that country more than 1,000 people from at our own expense. It was a very difficult phase, and Ukraine came to their help. We took in people of different nationalities, ethnic groups, different faiths, Afghan citizens of European countries, U.S., Canada. We did not look who needed help. Was it one of our own or somebody else? We helped all of them. We saved everyone. If every time there was a need, everyone in the world would be confident that help would come, the world would be definitely safer. Therefore, Ukraine has the moral right to propose a reform of the world security system. We have proven that we helped others not only happy time, but in dark times too. And now we need decisions from the Security Council for peace in Ukraine. If you do not know how to make this decision, you can do two things. Either remove Russia as an aggressor and a source of war, so it cannot block decisions about its own aggression, its own war, and then do everything that we can do to establish peace. Or the other option is, please show how we can reform or change, dissolve yourself, and work for peace. Or if there is no alternative and no option, then the next option would be dissolve yourself altogether. And I know that you can admit that if there is nothing that you can do besides conversation, we need peace. Ukraine needs peace, Europe needs peace, and the world needs peace. And finally, I would kindly ask you very much to watch this short video. Please give us 1 more minute of your time, the video that we want to show that one country can violate rights. And that's the result of being unpunished. If possible, please watch this video, because it is impossible to get everyone to come to our country and see it with your own eyes. Therefore, I would ask you to watch this video. Thank you very much.
Likely going to be a graphic video, you guys. Good morning. This is live, actually. I'm live, but also this is the president of Ukraine, President Zelensky, speaking to the UN Council live. Good morning, Rose. So, this is President Zelensky speaking to the UN Security Council. The Russian Federation is in there.
I'm not sure. The video, is it just coming?
Uploaded to the technicians of the Security Council. So they have it in their possession.
We don't have the video. I propose that while we sort that out, I thank His Excellency Mr. Zelensky for his compelling and powerful remarks. We will come back to the video when we've sorted out the technical issues around it. And may I say, speaking in my national capacity, may I express appreciation to the President for his leadership in wartime and for the extraordinary fortitude and bravery of the Ukrainian people under this unprovoked and illegal invasion. I resume my function as the President of the Security Council, and while we sort out the technical video, I propose to give the floor to those council members who wish to make statements. And I now give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Madam President. Let me also start by thanking UAE and Ambassador Nisbeh for her successful presidency during the month of March. Madam President, as you begin your Security Council presidency, I want to thank the United Kingdom for your leadership and for organizing this vital discussion on Ukraine today. I also want to thank the Secretary General for his remarks and the other briefers. And I'd like to extend a warm welcome to President Zelensky. I was so moved by the address he made recently to our Congress, and we are truly honored by his presence here under the circumstances that he and Ukraine face today. Madam President, last night I returned from a trip to Moldova and Romania. I saw with my own eyes the refugee crisis caused by Russia's unconscionable war. I spoke to refugees who indicated to me their desires to return to their home. And we've all seen the images on TV of the bombed out buildings. But what we have not seen is that behind those destroyed buildings are destroyed lives and destroyed families. I met with women and children who had fled Ukraine, who stuffed their lives into backpacks and left the only home they had ever known. And these were sobering conversations. One young woman I spoke to came with her 6-year-old brother, who had autism and is struggling with cancer. Their single mother helped them escape to save their lives. But Russia's war has interrupted the care her brother desperately needs. Another woman I spoke to fled with her 8-year-old from Odessa. The father, who they'd left behind, told them there was shelling right next to their apartment that very night. And they very well could have died had they not left. A third woman I met told me that she used to love to travel, but never expected her next trip would be to flee for her life. When I asked her where she was from, she started to say, and then she stopped with tears in her eyes and said, "I'm sorry. I don't know how to say it, whether I live in Kyiv or whether I used to live in Kyiv." She was realizing in the moment just how dramatically her life had changed because of this senseless war. These are 3 stories of more than 10 million people, 6 million internally displaced, 4 million who have left Ukraine altogether, 4 million people who have relied on the big-heartedness of countries like Moldova, Romania, Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, and others across the region and the world to welcome and support all those leaving Ukraine in search of safety. Ukraine's neighbors are bearing the brunt of Europe's most significant refugee crisis since World War II. And I want these countries to know that they have a committed partner in the United States. And that is why the United States announced recently that we are prepared to provide more than $1 billion in new funding toward humanitarian assistance for those affected by Russia's war in Ukraine and its severe impact around the world. And it is why we are welcoming up to 100,000 Ukrainians and others fleeing Russia's aggression to the United States. We will continue to assist humanitarian efforts to help the people of Ukraine and all those fleeing Putin's violence. But as heart-wrenching as the stories are that I heard in Moldova and Romania, there are some stories we will never get to hear. Those of the people we saw in the images out of Bucha. We've all seen the gruesome photos. Lifeless bodies lying in the streets, apparently summarily executed, their hands tied behind their backs. As we work to independently confirm the events depicted in these images, I would remind this council that based on the currently available information, the United States has assessed that members of Russia's forces have committed war crimes in Ukraine. And even before seeing the images from Bucha, President Zelensky, along with others in the region, were reporting that children were being abducted, and we heard him say that today. Also abducted are mayors and doctors, religious leaders, journalists, and all who dare defy Russia's aggression. Some of them, according to credible reports, including by the Mariupol City Council, have been taken to so-called filtration camps, where Russian forces are reportedly making tens of thousands of Ukrainian citizens relocate to Russia. Reports indicate that Russian federal security agents are confiscating passports and IDs, taking away cell phones, and separating families from one another.
This is being confirmed now, huh?
I do not need to spell out what these so-called filtration camps are reminiscent of. It's chilling, and we cannot look away. Every day, we see more and more how little Russia respects human rights. And that is why I announced yesterday that the United States, in coordination with Ukraine and many other UN member states, will seek Russia's suspension from the UN Human Rights Council. Given the growing mountain of evidence, Russia should not have a position of authority in a body whose very purpose is to promote respect for human rights. Not only is this the height of hypocrisy, it is dangerous. Russia is using its membership on the Human Rights Council as a platform for propaganda to suggest Russia has a legitimate concern for human rights. In fact, we will hear some of that propaganda here today, I know. And I will not dignify these lies with a response, only to say that every lie we hear from the Russian representative is more evidence that they do not belong on the Human Rights Council.
Facts.
140 UN member states voted to condemn Russia over its unprovoked war and the humanitarian crisis it has unleashed upon the people of Ukraine. Here's my message to all of you. Now is the time to match those words with action and show the world that we can work responsibly.
Yep.
And I share President Zelensky's view that this moment requires responsible world powers and global leaders to show some backbone and stand up to Russia's dangerous and unprovoked threat against Ukraine and the world. The Secretary General said that confronting this threat is the Security Council's charge. It is, and it is also the responsibility of UN leaders and leaders around the world, every single member state with a voice in the GA. No one can be a shield for Russia's aggression.
No one.
Suspending Russia from the Human Rights Council is something we collectively have the power to do in the General Assembly. Our votes can make a real difference. Russia's participation on the Human Rights Council hurts the Council's credibility.
Facts again.
It undermines the entire UN.
Literally, what's the
and
point
it
of
is
it?
Just plain wrong.
What's the point of it then?
Let us come together to do what is right and do right by the Ukrainian people. Let us take this step to help them to start to rebuild their lives. And let us match the courage of President Zelensky, who we are so honored to have with us today. President Zelensky, I want you to know that we stand with the people of Ukraine as you face down this brutal attack on your sovereignty, on your democracy, and on your freedom. Thank you.
If they don't get Russia off the council...
I thank the representative of the United States for her statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Albania.
Thank you, Madam President. Let me thank Ambassador Nusibe for having steered our work during the month of March and wish the UK and you, Madam President, full success in our common work during this month. Albania welcomes President Zelensky's presence to this meeting. His remarks are painful, and his account on what Ukraine is experiencing under Russian occupation is revolting. We stand by you, Mr. President, by your compatriots, all Ukrainians, for their heroic resistance, for their resilience that the entire world is admiring. You are not alone. You have the world on your side, because it's the side of the right, of the just, and as we hope, of victory. Slava Ukraini. Madam President, let me thank SG Guterres for his, again, very clear and powerful remarks. I also thank USG DiCarlo and Griffiths for their updates. This is the 14th meeting of the Security Council on Ukraine since the 31st of January, while the war of aggression has entered the second month. Let's establish a few basic yet meaningful facts. Russia has stalled and its imperial dreams are nowhere. Taking Ukraine finally proved impossible. Kyiv was too hard to swallow. Russian army is in disarray, but it has not stopped shelling and bombardments. But all this is not new, and all this is not news. The real news that has horrified the world is what Russia is leaving behind. The unspeakable horrors, those soul-crushing images in areas from which Russia is withdrawing. Images of civilians executed with a bullet in the neck, sometimes with their hands tied behind their backs or shot dead in their bicycles. Images of mass graves overflowing with corpses. Images of carnage and devastation, including looted homes, rape, and sexual violence, acts usually attributed only to thugs. They spring from the same cruel impulses as the bombardment of cities, homes, hospitals, schools, and kindergartens by the Russian forces. Bucha is an open-air graveyard, the notorious facelift of the Russian aggression. Madam President, we have heard time and again, it is not Russia. Yes, but no. It will be hard, actually impossible, to convince anyone that the destroyed tanks that clutter the roads, the mines and booby traps left behind amidst the wreckage, and the bodies of civilians killed by arbitrary executions and laying in the streets amidst debris are staged scenes for propaganda. Who would believe that Russia aggressed Ukraine simply to protect civilians, while Ukraine is busy staging horror movies? You may muzzle media back home, but you cannot fool satellite images. You cannot blind independent reporters and human rights NGOs on the ground. Waiting for Russia to accept and tell the truth is waiting for Godot to arrive, and he never does. These are facts, hard and sickening proof of the atrocities committed, the ugly face of this madness. Such crimes, as documented by Human Rights Watch and verified by independent and respected professional reporters, those who are banned for the Russians call for answers, call for thorough investigation, for effective accountability, for justice. Prime Minister Rama called these crimes a terrible pain and a horrible shame. Russia has an international obligation to abide by international humanitarian law, the laws of war, including the Geneva Conventions of 1949 and its first additional protocol. Russia has an obligation to abide by the order of ICJ to immediately halt its military activity in Ukraine. But unfortunately, Russia has made another choice, not to respect any of it, and has cancelled itself from international law. But the law will pursue it. Russian army and its commanders cannot escape accountability. The name of the butcher of Mariupol, a criminal that has reduced an entire city to ashes and has made its citizens go from 3 meals a day to barely 3 meals a week, is engraved in the ruins of the city. This is why we will support the call to suspend Russia's participation in the Human Rights Council. The UNGA resolution that created the Council stipulates that, and I quote, members of the Council will respect the highest standards in the promotion and protection of human rights. As we see, Russia's standards are nose-eating, and its presence there is a farce, a desecration of the place that is called to be the sanctuary of rights. Dear colleagues, Russia has announced that it will now shift its focus on eastern Ukraine. This means that it will concentrate its brutality there in what may end up becoming a war of attrition. Russia has blocked the renewal of the OSCE International Observer Mission in Ukraine. This denies the international community the independent eyes it needs there. This anticipates, sadly, more war, further atrocities, other crimes, even more humanitarian disasters. This war continues to particularly affect women and children. Millions have been displaced, many of them alone, in search of safety and security. It is heartbreaking to see mothers write names and addresses in the back of their children so that they are recognized in case they end up being orphans. We welcome the efforts of OCHA and its partners to deliver assistance in support of the people in Ukraine and the millions of refugees in neighboring countries. Madam President, let me end with this note. Rarely has the outcome of a war been so disastrously the complete opposite of what it wanted to achieve. Russia's army has been defeated by the outgunned and outnumbered Ukrainian resistance. Russia is isolated like never in its history. It has become the world's most sanctioned country in history. No country has ever seen itself transform in a matter of only 10 days from a global player into a financial and international pariah, to the point that it is obliged to find comfort in the support from North Korea and Syria. Dear colleagues, this aggression and its startling defeat have once and for all separated the fates of Ukrainians and Russians, because the case of Ukraine is also the cause of democracy against tyranny and kleptocracy. It is a fight between the will of the people against the vicious will of one whose reckless actions have challenged everything we stand for, and who is directly responsible for the economic disruption and food insecurity which is affecting the entire world. He may choose to stop, withdraw troops, and quit Ukraine, or continue to descend in the very abyss he has created and face the consequences. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Albania for his statement. I understand that we now have solved the technical problem, so I suggest we return to the video. Thank you.
All right, I thought they were shying away from it. I thought they were going to not show it. Here we go. Oh my goodness.
I would like to thank the delegation of Ukraine for sharing that video with us. The images are harrowing. Speaking in my national capacity, we are appalled by what we have seen and reiterate our solidarity with Ukraine. I resume my function as the Council President, and I now give the floor to the representative of Gabon.
I would like to, at the outset, express my appreciation to the Ambassador of the United Arab Emirates for her remarkable presidency. I thank the Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, Under Secretary General Madam Rosemary DiCarlo, as well as Mr. Martin Griffiths for their respective briefings. I welcome the participation in this meeting of President Zelensky. Madam President, we continue to witness, powerless, the war in Ukraine, while the grim toll of the dead and displaced mounts and fighting continues even as lives and civilian infrastructure are destroyed day in, day out. One day of war is without a doubt one day too many. And as the conflict enters its 6th week, the number of displaced persons is now surpassing the 10 million mark, almost 4 million of which have sought refuge in neighboring countries. This is a frightening humanitarian catastrophe, the repercussions of which are sure to worsen as a result of the risks of food insecurity due to the unpredictability of harvests, which will in turn have trans-regional knock-on effects. I'd like to welcome the Secretary General's establishment of a working group task force on food security, energy, and finance to reduce the impact of the war. Madam President, allegations concerning violence, especially sexual violence against women, are cause for grave, very grave concern. My country is very concerned as well at attacks against infrastructure and humanitarian personnel. Humanitarian workers working in theaters of conflict should never be the target of armed attacks. They are very often the link between victims of war and what remains of humanity when the rug has been pulled from under their feet. Humanitarian workers should be able to funnel humanitarian assistance to wherever it is needed without obstacles and in conditions of security guaranteed by all parties. It should be possible to form secure evacuation convoys to allow for the smooth evacuations of persons wishing to leave combat zones. This is a vital form of assistance to the almost 18 million people in need of humanitarian assistance in Ukraine. The situation in Mariupol, to mention just this town, is becoming plainly untenable. The exponential deterioration in living conditions, indeed survival conditions in certain places, is very concerning, especially when civilian infrastructure and the provision of essential public services is affected. We are concerned at the risks of disease resulting from water shortages in certain parts of Ukraine, but also health risks ensuing from the lack of access to primary or specialized health care. Women, children, the elderly, and anyone not taking part in hostilities should be able to be rescued in every sense of the word without fearing for their lives. Madam President, war is a horror, a break with that which binds us together as humans. It is precisely to seek to reduce the effects of this break that international humanitarian law exists. To not give free rein to the expression of might is right. In fact, it is an attempt to address through law a break in the human contract. All parties should abide by international humanitarian law. Concerning the persistent reports of massacres, summary executions, atrocities, and other mass crimes against civilians in Bucha, there is an urgent need for a UN-led, free and independent inquiry into, as soon as possible, to shed light on the victims and the circumstances surrounding these atrocities. In the interim, it is vital that this council not lose sight of its role, which is to work towards restoring peace and security by offering an alternative to war. The return to peace in Ukraine will not be achieved through mudslinging. Madam President, this war has lasted long enough, and its effects are already being felt beyond Ukraine's borders. From our perspective, the equation is posed in terms of a decision on establishing a ceasefire and on creating the conditions for safe and unfettered provision of humanitarian assistance needed by populations in distress. I wish to reiterate Gabon's appreciation to neighboring countries that continue to mobilize to urgently welcome refugees, we encourage them to extend the same welcome to all persons in distress without distinction as to origin or race, including African nationals and students. We request them to ensure respect for their dignity, and we call for fair treatment of all persons in distress. It is urgent that the parties commit resolutely to negotiation to bring an end to the hostilities. We call to a de-escalation and a halt to the combat. There is no other way. My country is closely following current negotiations between the parties, especially in Istanbul, and we hope that they will soon lead to a ceasefire so as to create a climate of confidence and to establish the climate of calm needed for diplomacy to make its voice heard and for the guns to be silenced. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Gabon for her statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Here we go.
Thank you, Madam President. I would like to, first of all, express our gratitude to the delegation of the United Arab Emirates for their presidency in the month of March. We're also grateful to the Secretary General, to Rosemary DiCarlo and Martin Griffith for their briefings. We also listened to the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky. We'd like to thank Martin for his visit to Moscow, during which, as far as we can judge, he had some useful meetings and discussions. Better than anyone else, he should know the efforts that Russia is undertaking every single day to organize humanitarian corridors. However, the arrangements reached with the help of international mediators is consistently not being implemented by the Ukrainian side. I'm not going to overload you with figures. You can such communiques are published every single day by our Ministry of Defense. I simply would like to say that just out of Mariupol toward the east, without any participation by the Ukrainian side, we have managed to save 123,500 people.
Save.
Now, overall, since the beginning of this special military operation, over 600,000 people have been evacuated to Russia, including over 119,000 children. And we're not talking about any kind of coercion or abduction, as our Western partners like to present this, but rather the voluntary decision by these people is testified by many videos that are accessible in social media. Madam President, another topic of the meeting was declared today, which is practically not being discussed today, so I'm going to leave that out. I simply would like to take advantage of the virtual presence here of the President of Ukraine and would like to address him directly. Now, we place on your conscience the ungrounded accusations against the Russian military, which are not confirmed by any eyewitnesses. And we spoke about this in detail yesterday at our press conference. Vladimir Alexandrovich, we all remember when in 2019 you were elected as the president of Ukraine. Now, there were a lot of hopes tied to your election because you were, as a candidate, pledged peace and an end to the war in Donbass, including the Russian-speaking population, which you pledged to protect. So it seemed that we were on the verge of correcting the historical injustice when, as a result of the Maidan coup in 2014, Ukraine began to be transformed into a hateful anti-Russia. And that seemed to be on the verge of being turned, that page of being turned. However, those hopes failed to be to materialize, and now you scornfully call the residents of Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republic as a subspecies, repeating what your predecessor stated, who in fact threatened that the residents of the Donetsk and Lugansk will rot in their basements. And you are calling on them to return, to leave and to Russia. And now you've declared war against your native Russian language by introducing, in essence, a linguistic inquisition in a country where Russian is the native language for a minimum of 40% of the population. And today, explosions and artillery rounds are exploding over the entire territory of Ukraine, and not only in the east, where they haven't ceased for the past 8 years. And they're exploding precisely because there was no other way of bringing peace to the Donbass, unfortunately, after you and your subordinates categorically refused to comply with the Minsk agreements, at the same time by preparing already back in March to solve the problem of the Donbass by military means. In the course of our special operations, we have found many secret orders testifying to this. We are told that there can be no Nazis in Ukraine. However, we know very well that not only are they there, but unfortunately they are running the show. And how can it be any other way when the national heroes of Ukraine are Nazi collaborators Bandera and Shuhevich, who are responsible not only for the Holocaust, but the killing of hundreds of thousands of peaceful Poles, Russians, Ukrainians, and Jews? You simply preferred not to notice Ukrainian Nazis, pretending that they're simply not there. But unfortunately, they are there. And they are very many of them, and among them a lot of young people. How do we know that? Well, they're not concealing it. They have tattoos made, Nazi tattoos. They decorate their clothing with swastikas and other Nazi symbols. They give Nazi greetings, and they're open about it in the social media. There are particularly many of them in the national battalions such as Aidar, the Right Sector, and the Azov Battalion. And that would be one thing, but they're also acting like Nazis, and they're killing like them. And they're not just killing Russian or prisoner soldiers, on which they torture and gloat about it on the social media, but they kill their own. Your neo-Nazis and radicals have shown unrivaled cruelty against the civilians, which they use as human shields, and position heavy artillery next to residential buildings and multiple rocket launchers as well. Today we've heard once again a huge amount of lies about Russian soldiers and military. We have hundreds, if not thousands, of video testimonials of people who are ready to provide testimony about the cruelty of Ukrainian nationals. I'll just read some of them here. These are cruel histories, but you need to hear them. Natalia Kudinova says, the mayor of the town was one of the first to run away. Afterwards, the Ukrainian authorities lied that Russia was not letting people through humanitarian corridors. The National Battalion Azov, under threat of death, kept women and children in basements, and it robbed civilians at checkpoints. A grandmother said that the Azov Battalion did not allow her to leave basements. Anyone trying to leave was shot at the Azov checkpoint. Women and girls were stripped naked and had their jewelry and money taken away, including their Valentina Nikolaevna Borisenko says how Ukrainian soldiers kicked out women with 2 children from a private home and then used it to lob mortar rounds. And that woman had 2 children. They were kicked out by soldiers with blue armbands. Those are Ukrainian insignias, insignias of the Ukrainian army. Marina Vasilyevna testified that she was tortured in a basement by Ukrainian security services. They tied me to a sewer pipe when I found out I was Russian. They beat me, used electric current, raped me, and they threatened to rape my young daughter. Shapovalova Olga Georgievna, we left Mariupol from Mangusha on the 25th of March. firing positions of the Ukrainian army were positioned between residential homes and in the courtyard of a school. They used civilians as cover. In the neighborhood around the drama theater, a Ukrainian tank drove around, firing indiscriminately, including targeting residential buildings. On the territory of the 69th, 68th, and the 5th school, tanks were stationed. I saw this with my own eyes. Madam Suportkina Olga Sergeyevna, this is her testimony, and school number 15 of Mariupol, starting from 25th of February, the Ukrainian armed forces took up positions and left on the 7th of March. They directed fire from there. Our building was badly damaged from the shelling. On the 8th and 9th of March, there was intense shelling, intentionally targeting residential homes. Ukrainian soldiers were asked why they're doing it. They replied that until they destroy the entire Russian spirit in whole, they will remain there. They started looting immediately. They plundered all the shops. And it was the forces of the Donetsk People's Republic that helped evacuate us and drove us to Mangusha. There are many other heart-rending stories. There are Russians and Ukrainians tortured to death with swastikas burned into their chests. There are looters and criminals who you distributed weapons to. There are civilians and foreigners who are held hostages. And in spite of all factual evidence and common sense, you're trying to lay the blame for their death on the Russian military. This is absolutely unacceptable. The fact that even consider that Russian military would be capable of this. And now we're seeing blatant criminally staged events with the Ukrainian civilians who were killed by their own radicals in the best traditions of Goebbels to accuse the Russian army. Those killed in the areas from which the Russian forces withdrew after encouraging peace negotiations in Istanbul. So now it turns out that we shouldn't have withdrawn. I'm talking about Bucha first and foremost. I understand that you you saw corpses and heard testimonials, but you only saw what they showed you. You couldn't ignore the flagrant inconsistencies in the version of events which are being promoted by Ukrainian and Western media. The fact that the corpses were not there right after the withdrawal of the Russian forces, which is confirmed by several videos, and the fact that there are recordings where Ukrainian radicals urged shooting at those with white armbands, in other words, against civilians. If you saw the video very carefully that was shown today, you'll see that those people who are on the ground have white armbands. These are civilians. And the fact that the corpses on the video in no way resemble those that could have been lying on the street for 3 or 4 days. And based on the sensational and completely scientifically absurd information of the New York Times, they were there since the 20th of March. So the only ones who could fall for this fake are absolute dilettantes or Western partners who don't want to hear anything and have been calling black, white, and vice versa for a long time now. Unfortunately, these countries don't give a hoot about Ukraine itself. It's simply a pawn in the geopolitical game against Russia, which they will sacrifice easily. But in the meantime, they will try to prolong the conflict by delivering as much weapons as possible and ammunition. But the most important thing is that how have we sunk to such depths of cruelty that nationalists are displaying? For example, those from the Azov battalion. And you, I'm addressing the Ukrainian president. In your interview with the Americans media, you coyly, bashfully state that they are what they are. I really hope that you will reflect on this and hope that you will find a solution to the situation, because it depends only on you. Because we came to you, to Ukraine, not to conquer lands. We came to bring the long-awaited peace to the blood-soaked land of Donbass. Not a truce, but a true, lasting peace. And for this, we need to root out the cruelty which I mentioned. We need to cut out the malignant Nazi tumor that is consuming Ukraine and would in time begin to consume Russia. And we will achieve that goal. I hope sooner rather than later, because there is no other outcome. We are not shooting against civilian targets in order to save as many civilians as possible. This is precisely why we're not advancing as fast as many expected. We're not acting like Americans and their allies in Iraq and Syria. We're razing entire cities to the ground. They had no pity for them, but we felt great pity because these are people who are close to us. But radicals have nothing to lose. They couldn't care less about civilians. They're ready to take to the grave with them the entire population of the Ukraine, as was clearly demonstrated by the provocation in Bucha. Don't allow the West to achieve its goals, Vladimir Alexandrovich. Make the right decisions that are needed for your country, because the West is ready to fight in the Ukraine until the last Ukrainian. Make that decision now, because the real situation on the front. Later, it might be too late soon. Thank you very much for your attention.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation
for
his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Ireland.
Can we hear from Ukraine?
Thank you very much, Madam President. And I'd also like to thank the Secretary-General and our other briefers this morning. I want to express a very warm welcome to President Zelensky being with us this morning. President Zelensky,
really quick,
courage,
a lot of that he said for Russian media, by the way.
And the courage of
That's how they operate. People like him.
Are an example to
the type of people
us.
Like him, or that watch the media, and that type of a person. They need those clips because that means something to them. They needed him to say that. Then they're going to replay that on Russian state media as if he did something, and then sell it as if, damn, look at, he's speaking all that truth. And then if Russia gets kicked off the council, they're like, dude, they're the levels of gaslighting and deception that Russia has going on is like giving me ultimate anxiety.
40 days later, our call has been left unanswered. Instead, over the last 40 days, we have witnessed unprecedented levels of destruction and human suffering. We are watching cities pounded by Russian artillery. We are seeing millions forced to flee their homes, seeking refuge from Russian aggression. Just minutes ago, here in this chamber, we have seen the utter shocking images of civilians lying in the streets of Bucha and elsewhere in Ukraine. Some, we know, are piled into improvised mass graves. Simply harrowing. So many innocent lives lost on our watch as our pleas for peace go unheeded. The attempts here today to deny Russian culpability are frankly appalling in their cynicism, and I see them as an insult to the memory of those slaughtered civilians. Madam President, we roundly condemn the atrocities reportedly committed by the Russian armed forces in a number of occupied Ukrainian towns. The images from Bucha and other towns in the Kyiv region liberated by Ukrainian forces are horrifying. We here cannot suspend our humanity. Our thoughts, first and foremost, must be with the families of those killed. Their pain at the loss of their loved ones in such an unspeakable manner is almost unimaginable. Let's be clear. The Russian authorities are responsible for these atrocities committed while they had effective control of the area. The Russian authorities are subject to the international law of occupation. There can never be impunity from such crimes. Never, ever. Not in Bucha, not in any other town or village, ever. Where crimes have been committed, they must be fully investigated and evidence preserved so that these crimes can be prosecuted by domestic and international courts, including the International Criminal Court. Ireland will continue to support efforts to ensure robust and independent investigation of all violations of international law. We must have accountability and justice for the victims and for the survivors of this war. We at this table share that responsibility in face of such atrocity. We call on the Russian Federation to abide by the order of the International Court of Justice and to immediately cease its military action and withdraw from the entire territory of Ukraine. Madam President, in the last 40 days, we have seen a horrific humanitarian disaster unfold in Ukraine because of the Russian Federation's unprovoked and unjustifiable further invasion of that country. A country where just weeks ago citizens lived in relative peace and prosperity, and one which has been transformed now into one where families lack access to basic necessities, where basements have become bomb shelters, where millions have become IDPs and refugees. The use of explosive weapons in populated areas has had a devastating impact on civilians in the midst of active hostilities. Once again, we call for the parties to the conflict to comply with international humanitarian law, including the obligation to direct attacks only against military objectives, the prohibitions against indiscriminate and disproportionate attacks, and the obligation to take all feasible precautions in attack. We have heard increasing allegations of sexual violence by Russian soldiers. You referred to this morning, Secretary General. We must stress that conflict-related sexual violence can constitute a war crime. The perpetrators of such crimes must be accountable. They must be held accountable. They will be held accountable. Sexual violence is another abhorrent crime of this war that cannot go unanswered. We again reiterate the need for full, safe, and unhindered humanitarian access to those in need, as called for today by Martin Griffiths. Secretary General, we again echo your call for Russia to implement an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. It is the very least the aggressor can do. It is way past time. As we know, the reverberations of this war are reaching far beyond Ukraine. It's unacceptable that Russia's war of choice against Ukraine is also having, and will continue to have, significant spillover effects across the globe. Deterioration of food security, surging energy prices, increasing poverty. The most vulnerable and impoverished in developing countries will suffer the most. We utterly reject that. Madam President, it is our collective responsibility here at this table to maintain international peace and security, nothing less. This is why we call on the Russian Federation to stop this war, to stop its unlawful attempts to establish occupying authorities, to stop destabilizing the democratic foundations of the Ukrainian state. Such steps are yet further reprehensible violations of Ukraine's independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity. It gets harder each time to say this, but it is never too late to do the right thing and to end this war now. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Ireland for her statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Brazil.
Thank you, Madam President. Let me start by thanking Ambassador Nusseibeh, along with her team at the UAE mission, for competently navigating the work of the Security Council in March. I welcome His Excellency, Mr. Volodymyr Zelensky, President of Ukraine, in the Council today. I would like to thank the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, and the Secretary General for Political Affairs, Rosemary DiCarlo, and Under Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, Martin Griffiths, for their updated presentations about the situation in Ukraine. Madam President, as we enter into the 6th week of hostilities in the Ukrainian territory, we continue to witness appalling images of human suffering. The recent reports of acts of violence against civilians in Bucha, Irpin, Kharkiv, Donetsk, and other places affected by the conflict are extremely worrying, according to the statement by the ICRC. We call for a really independent and thorough investigation of all reported violations with the full cooperation of both parties to the conflict, without prejudging any conclusions, and underscore the need for perpetrators to be held accountable. The international community is witnessing for too long appalling scenes of destruction of once peaceful cities, with shocking images from the conflict and the desperation of thousands of civilians trapped in the battlefield, with no food, no water, and no electricity. Once again, we renew our pleas for a broad, effective, and immediate cessation of hostilities in Ukraine. Only after the silence of the guns and the withdrawal of troops are achieved will it be possible to halt the immense costs of human suffering this conflict has brought. Madam President, the General Assembly has recently adopted a resolution on the humanitarian situation in Ukraine. As we said on that occasion, the General Assembly could not become a bystander of the shocking consequences of the conflict. And, as we added last week in this chamber, neither can the Security Council. As the main UN organ with primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security, the Security Council has the mandate and the responsibility to address this situation in an effective manner. Nevertheless, our assessment is that the Security Council is failing in its role to help in supporting efforts to foster a constructive dialogue between the parties, with the aim of brokering an effective peace settlement to this conflict. We deeply regret that the Security Council has not been able to speak with one voice throughout the crisis. Promoting compliance with international humanitarian law, protecting civilians, calling for peace. These are objectives that should unite rather than divide us. We should strive to create the conditions for, on the one hand, invigorating the political negotiations, and, on the other, reaching an understanding on practical measures to minimize human suffering in Ukraine. Civilians wishing to flee the hostilities must be able to do so in safety, and those who decide to stay cannot become targets of attacks. In the same vein, parties must grant safe passage to relief consignments to those in need. Once again, Brazil reiterates the call for all parties to fully respect and ensure respect for international humanitarian law. The causes of conflict, whatever they are, do not undermine the obligations of all parties have to guarantee that civilians should be protected, that the wounded receive medical care, that humanitarian assistance reach those in need, and that detainees be treated humanely in all circumstances. There must be no politicization of humanitarian actions, nor selective application of international humanitarian law. Also, geopolitical objectives must not supersede the endeavor for peace, nor prolong the human suffering caused by war. Madam President, this conflict and its associated sanctions, apart from the enormous human suffering and devastation caused in Ukraine, is having spillover effects in the entire world, especially through increased prices of oil, gas, grains, and fertilizers, among others. Food insecurity has become an even greater threat to the world's poorest people, above all in developing countries. The longer this conflict persists, the higher the risk of further instability, hunger, and devastation in Ukraine and around the world. It is high time to return to the path of dialogue and diplomacy for a peaceful settlement of the conflict. We urgently need the cessation of hostilities. De-escalation of tensions and negotiations are the only way out of this conflict, not only for the countries directly involved, but also for the entire world. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Brazil for his remarks, and I now give the floor to the representative of Kenya.
Thank you, Madam President. I congratulate you on assuming the presidency of the Security Council for April and assure you of my delegation's full support. I listened closely to the remarks by the Secretary General and his Undersecretaries General, Rosemary DiCarlo and Martin Griffiths, hoping to hear that our fears that the war in Ukraine has entered a new, more dangerous phase were exaggerated. Sadly, they offered no such comfort. Instead, we are left with the words of His Excellency Volodymyr Zelensky, the President of Ukraine, who has described the horrifying suffering of civilians in Bucha and other towns and neighborhoods in Ukraine. His account of the atrocities is in stark contrast to that of our colleague in the Security Council, the representative of the Russian Federation. But the fact that the truth in Bucha is contested is the surest sign that we stand on the precipice of more widespread abuses of human rights. In April 1994, even as genocide engulfed Rwanda, there were members of the Security Council contesting the horrifying truth that 1 million people were being murdered. We should stand warned that the inability of the Council to establish the facts and accordingly attribute responsibility may enable the risk of escalation into far worse crimes. Beyond the city of Bucha, Madam President, we're extremely worried about the safety of civilians who are trapped in other besieged cities and villages, such as Mariupol and Kherson. Our actions today should seek to prevent what we have witnessed happen in Bucha take place in Mariupol and Kherson. While we debate who is responsible for the horrors of Bucha, it is incontestable that what started as a special military operation is now a war, and that what began with reassurances of limited aims, not targeted at civilians, has led to thousands of dead civilians and millions of refugees and internally displaced. No one can doubt that there are flagrant violations of international law, international humanitarian law, and the UN Charter underway in Ukraine. Kenya condemns the abuses undertaken in the past few weeks and those in the eastern provinces of the country during the years that the conflict has raged. Madam President, the war in Ukraine is today's most dangerous threat to the maintenance of international peace and security. It is the latest assault by the most powerful states against the multilateral order. Their continued abuse of the Charter created growing cracks over the years in the global security order. Now the bottom has fallen out. Ukraine may now become a model for a new generation of disastrous wars on multiple continents. Millions of refugees are being created, and there will be many more as the economic effects of the war produce and intensify conflicts elsewhere. Accelerating food and energy prices are plunging millions into worse forms of poverty. The UN, as a forum for solutions to humanity's most pressing problems, is losing prestige and its historical standing. President Zelensky has left us with ideas for Security Council reform that we need to consider seriously. Things have fallen apart, and the center cannot hold under these assaults on our United Nations. We must reform. There are no easy solutions. Even a negotiation that is not properly structured to protect the people and sovereignty of Ukraine could be the prelude to a wider war. For now, we urge the following urgent steps, understanding their limits due to the continued inability of the Security Council to act decisively. We call for an impartial and prompt United Nations investigation into the atrocities against the civilians in Bucha and other towns in Ukraine. This calls for an immediate end of all hostilities to guarantee unfettered access by the investigating teams. We urge the conflicting parties to immediately make clear to their military personnel that they will be held to account on the basis of command or superior responsibility, if they violate the international laws that regulate warfare. We commend Ukraine's neighbors for opening their borders to refugees of multiple nationalities from Ukraine. We continue to urge them to ensure that the thousands of affected Africans be treated in accordance with international humanitarian law and basic dignity. We commend OCHA and many other organizations and individuals who have come to the aid of the deserving people of Ukraine. In this regard, we welcome the third UN-organized humanitarian convoy that reached thousands of people in need in Sumy and other cities. We call for the urgent activation of safe passages with no restrictions and call for unimpeded humanitarian access to the many in need, particularly those in Mariupol, Kherson, and other besieged cities. We also urge the Security Council to reassure the world of its relevance by approaching the other conflicts with renewed vigor. The humanitarian crisis caused by conflict in Afghanistan, in Haiti, the Horn of Africa, the unfolding situation in the Korean Peninsula, Lebanon, Libya, Myanmar, Palestine and Israel, Syria, Yemen, and the Sahel deserve our urgent attention. We look forward to the Secretary General rallying the international community to deploy resources to cushion the most vulnerable from the effects of the conflict in Ukraine. We reiterate our call for the cessation of hostilities to allow humanitarian operations under clearly defined contact lines and humanitarian passages. Madam President, I finish by reaffirming Kenya's recognition of the inviolable rights of Ukraine to its sovereignty, territorial integrity, and political independence. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Kenya for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Mexico.
Madam President, we wish you every success during your presidency this month. And we recognize and acknowledge the work of the United Arab Emirates in leading the work of the Security Council last month. We thank the Secretary General and Under Secretaries General DiCarlo and Griffiths for their briefings. And we appreciate the participation of President Volodymyr Zelensky in this meeting of the Security Council. We have listened to him. We did so closely and with the respect due his office. We have also looked on with horror at the images shared with us. They are like the Guernica mural recreated with even more civilian victims. For the past 6 weeks, the world has been looking on in dismay at the devastating consequences of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Through 2 General Assembly resolutions, the international community has taken a clear and strong stance by deploring that invasion and demanding an immediate cessation of hostilities and any attack against civilian populations or civilian infrastructure. And it has also pointed to the urgent need for secure and unfettered, swift humanitarian access. The International Court of Justice also ordered the immediate suspension of military operations on Ukrainian territory. It now falls to the United Nations to take action inasmuch as it is the guarantor of enforcement of the ICJ's decisions. All mechanisms for peaceful settlement of dispute established under international law must be geared towards achieving this common objective. Regrettably, hostilities continue and their impact on civilians is worsening, as are the humanitarian needs of the population, including the humanitarian needs of more and more urgent need of refugees and internally displaced persons. The flood of images of the streets of Bucha and other cities circulating in recent days have moved the world. We strongly condemn the atrocities captured in those images. There is absolutely nothing that can justify them. Protecting the civilian population is an undeniable responsibility borne by the international community. As the High Commissioner for Human Rights pointed out, gross international humanitarian and international human rights law violations compel us to consider the possibility that war crimes may indeed have been committed. Mexico stands strongly and resolutely by the Secretary General's statement calling for prompt, impartial investigations leading to the identification of perpetrators and effective accountability for them. By the same token, we will be closely following the work of the International Criminal Court, and we support the prosecutor who is now in the process of investigating allegations of international crimes committed in Ukraine, as well as the Independent International Commission of Inquiry established for the same person by the United Nations Human Rights Council, and their reports will be decisive. The consequences of this war have been horrifying. Its tragic impact will produce serious effects in the medium and long term, not only in the region, but throughout the rest of the world. As was clearly stated by the Executive Director of the World Food Programme, millions of people will pay themselves the toll in this conflict. Supplies of basic food items will run short in many regions where they are already insecure and fragile. Now, given all the difficulties that this implies and the urgency ensuing, the efforts of the international community to tackle the humanitarian tragedy are only temporary. The solution, as it has been said, is an immediate end to the hostilities and a political agreement that restores diplomatic negotiations. We are resolutely in support of Under-Secretary General Griffith's initiatives to broker humanitarian pauses to pave the way for smoother delivery of humanitarian assistance. Mexico appreciates and commends the work of all humanitarian actors involved in Ukraine, as well as the solidarity of neighboring countries that have received millions of refugees and the mediation efforts of various actors and countries. It is our hope that this Council will fulfill its responsibility to contribute effectively to putting an end to the war and restoring peace, and to do so in strict compliance with international law and international humanitarian law, and put an end to war and restore peace. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Mexico for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of India.
That was Mexico. Here's India. Like the video if you guys haven't. Share the stream. Spam those reactions.
Thank you, Madam President.
Make sure you're subscribed to the YouTube channel.
Let me begin by thanking Secretary General Antonio Guterres for his presence and remarks on the situation in Ukraine. I also thank USG Rosemary DiCarlo and USD Martin Griffiths for their respective briefings on the security and humanitarian situation. We thank the participation of His Excellency, the President of Ukraine, at today's meeting. I also take this opportunity to thank the United Arab Emirates and Ambassador Lana Nusayba for their excellent presidency. Madam President, the situation in Ukraine has not shown any significant improvement since the Council last discussed the issue. The security situation has only deteriorated, as well as its humanitarian consequences. Recent reports of civilian killings in Bushehr are deeply disturbing. We unequivocally condemn these killings and support the call for an independent investigation. We hope the international community will continue to respond positively to the humanitarian needs. We support calls urging for guarantees of safe passage to deliver essential humanitarian and medical supplies. Keeping in view the dire humanitarian situation in Ukraine, India has been sending humanitarian supplies to Ukraine and its neighbors, which include medicines and other essential relief material. We stand ready to provide more medical supplies to Ukraine in the coming days. India continues to remain deeply concerned at the worsening situation and reiterates its call for immediate cessation of violence and end to hostilities. We have emphasized right from the beginning of the conflict the need to pursue the path of diplomacy and dialogue. When innocent human lives are at stake, diplomacy must prevail as the only viable option. In this context, we take note of the ongoing efforts, including the meetings held recently between the parties. The impact of the crisis is being felt beyond the region, with increasing food and energy costs, especially for many developing countries. It is in our collective interest to work constructively, both inside the United Nations and outside, towards seeking an early resolution to the conflict. Allow me to reiterate the importance of UN guiding principles of humanitarian assistance once again. Humanitarian action must always be guided by the principles of humanitarian assistance, which is humanity, neutrality, impartiality, and independence. These measures should never be politicized. We continue to emphasize to all member states of the UN that the global order is anchored on international law, UN Charter, and respect for territorial integrity and sovereignty of states. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of India for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of China.
Comment where you're tuning in from as well.
Thank you, Madam President.
Madam
President, I first of all would like to congratulate you upon assuming the presidency of the Council for this month. At the same time, I would also like to thank Ambassador Nusebe as well as the UAE team for their outstanding work when UAE was the president of the Council during the month of March. Madam President, de-escalating tension in Ukraine and putting an early end to the fighting is the urgent expectation of the international community and the strong desire of China. We have many times emphasized that dialogue and negotiation is the only way out for opening a door of peace. Russia and Ukraine have already had many rounds of negotiations. We welcome the two sides to stick to the general direction of peace negotiations, overcome difficulties and differences, and continue to build conditions for a comprehensive settlement of the crisis. The international community should create favorable conditions and environment for negotiations between the two sides, open up space for political settlement, and should not set up roadblocks to increase resistance for peace, let alone add fuel to the fire to aggravate confrontations. Every effort should be made to prevent the escalation of the localized conflict. China attaches great importance to the humanitarian issue in Ukraine and supports all initiatives and measures conducive to alleviate the humanitarian crisis in Ukraine. As the current conflict continues, we call on the parties to abide by international humanitarian law, protect the safety of civilians and civilian facilities, minimize civilian casualties, and ensure safe and smooth evacuation and access of humanitarian corridors, as well as guarantee the basic rights of women, children, and wounded fighters. Humanitarian issues should not be politicized. The humanitarian needs of Ukraine and its neighboring countries are enormous. International humanitarian agencies should maintain neutral and impartial should maintain neutrality and impartiality, actively mobilize and coordinate more resources, and make unremitting efforts to save lives and protect civilians. China has provided and will continue to provide humanitarian assistance to Ukraine and its neighboring countries. Under international law, civilians should be spared of any forms of violence in armed conflict, and attacks against civilians are unacceptable and should not occur. The reports and images of civilian deaths in Bucha are very disturbing, and the relevant circumstances and specific causes of the incident must be verified and established. Any and all accusations should be based on facts. Before conclusions are drawn, parties should exercise restraint and avoid unfounded accusations. Madam President, as pointed out by Secretary General Guterres, the spillover effects of the Ukrainian crisis is having a major impact on the world and the developing countries in particular. This requires our great attention and our strengthened management. Sanctions are not an effective means to solve the problem, but will instead accelerate the spillover of the crisis and bring new and complex problems. Today, with the deep development of globalization and the closely linked community of mankind, the implementation of all-dimensional and indiscriminate sanctions is tantamount to politicizing, instrumentalizing, and weaponizing the world economy, triggering serious crises in the fields of global economy and trade, finance, energy, food, industrial chain, and supply chain, and endangering decades of development gains of the international community and making people of all countries pay a hefty price. The vast number of developing countries are not parties to the conflict and should not be involved in this confrontation, let alone be forced to bear the consequences of geopolitical conflicts and great power competition. The world's major economies should be responsible for managing the risk of crisis spillover and maintaining the stability of global markets and the momentum of the global economic recovery. Madam President, more than 30 years after the end of the Cold War, such a geopolitical tragedy taking place in Europe now deserves our profound reflection. The sovereignty and territorial integrity of all countries should be respected, and small and medium-sized countries should not be pushed to the forefront of confrontation between and among great powers. All countries have the right to decide their foreign policy independently and should not be forced to take sides. The security of all countries is inseparable, and the security of one country cannot be achieved at the expense of the security of others. We call upon the United States, NATO, and the European Union to engage in comprehensive dialogues with Russia to face head-on their differences accumulated over the years, find solutions to the problem, and promote the building of a balanced, effective, and sustainable regional security framework. On the issue of Ukraine, China does not seek geopolitical self-interest. It is not our mindset to watch the situation indifferently from the sideline, let alone do anything to add fuel to the fire. There's only one goal we sincerely look forward to, and that is peace. China will continue to promote peace talks and play a constructive and responsible role in helping resolve the crisis in Ukraine. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the
representative
of China for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of France.
A lot of word salad right there.
Madame la Présidente.
Madam President, I'd like to hail the participation of President Zelensky in this meeting, and through him I'd like to hail the courage and the spirit of resistance of the Ukrainian people. France stands by your side. I thank the Secretary General, the Undersecretary General for Political Affairs, and the Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs for their statements. The war of aggression that Russia is conducting against Ukraine has, in the past few days, reached a new threshold of horror. The images of mass graves and of mass atrocities against civilians in towns in the north of Ukraine, in Bucha, Borodyanka, and Motin, have led to the condemnation and indignation around the world. We like to express our wholehearted compassion for victims and our full solidarity with the Ukrainians, and we're still shocked by the horrific images that were shown in the video this morning. France condemns in the strongest terms the massive atrocities committed by the Russian forces. These atrocities could constitute war crimes, but also crimes against humanity. The disinformation tactics used by Russia to conceal its crimes unfortunately are no surprise to anyone. Once again, Moscow, to the disgrace of the murder of civilians and children, is adding the disgrace of lying and denial. Madam President, in the face of these horrific crimes, France urges not giving in to hatred and rather to take action along the following lines. First of all, we need to maintain the strongest possible pressure to compel the Russian authorities to put an end to a war that is compromising global security.
Not to, just really quick, you're tuning into this live Mercado Media Productions. We're watching the UN Security Council, which Russia's on, and I'm interested to see if they're going to host a vote to remove Russia at the end of this. They need a 2/3 vote to remove Russia. So they're all talking right now, basically repeating themselves, minus China and some of the countries supporting Russia. So again, this is the UN Security Council. This is live. Zelensky already spoke.
International jurisdiction have competence to judge the perpetrators of these atrocities. In particular, we call on Russia as well as Ukraine to fully cooperate with the International Criminal Court and with the Commission of Inquiry set up by the Human Rights Council. Madam President, Russia is pursuing methodically and with determination its war of Ukraine with its share of destruction and tragedy. We call for the respect of international humanitarian law. Civilians, including children and humanitarian personnel, must be protected. The same goes for civilian infrastructure, in particular hospitals and schools. We welcome the mobilization of the countries neighboring Ukraine, who are playing a major role in receiving refugees. The hospitality that they've demonstrated is a credit to Europe. The European Union has in particular mobilized a package of over 500 million euros of urgent support to the Ukraine, and the European Council that took place on the 24th and 25th of March also is planning to set up a trust fund of solidarity for the Ukraine. France has also contributed 100 million of humanitarian assistance. We support the efforts of the Secretary General and Martin Griffith to achieve a humanitarian ceasefire, to allow the evacuation of civilians from besieged cities, and to ensure access to humanitarian assistance. All efforts should be made in order to achieve a cessation of hostilities. This is an initial stage towards a lasting solution to the conflict, and it's necessary for the credibility of the Russian involvement in negotiations. France is determined to continue to contribute to efforts of peace, in particular by supporting Ukrainian authorities in seeking a political solution once the ceasefire is achieved, as well as by maintaining channels of dialogue with Russia. Madam President, as the French Minister of Europe and Foreign Affairs recalled on the 3rd of April, France is fully engaged in putting an end to this war of aggression, of which the human cost and humanitarian impact is increasing by the day. In the face of the horror of the Russian aggression, France reaffirms its solidarity and support with the Ukraine and Ukrainian people. We also call on the Russian people, who are also victims in this war, to continue to find ways of expressing their opposition to this conflict, in spite of the repression. This is necessary to break the logic of hatred in which Vladimir Putin wants to imprison both Ukrainians and Russians. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of France for her statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Norway.
Thank you, President. I thank the briefers for their valuable inputs. Norway also expressed its utmost support to you, Secretary General, to make full use of your good offices in search for a peaceful solution. I want to thank President Zelensky, through you, Ambassador, for his strong testimony this morning. and for the heroic fight the President, the Ukrainian government, and the Ukrainian people are engaged in for your country and for the peace and freedom of us all. We are with you and we support you. As we heard from President Zelensky and have seen this weekend, the need for peace could not be more urgent. For more than 40 days and nights, attacks from Russia have continued to batter the Ukrainian people and their cities, causing death and destruction. And the suffering is escalating. We too are appalled by the reports coming out of the areas around Kyiv and other regions. We are deeply shocked by the atrocities committed against civilians in places that have been held by the Russian forces, including Bucha. The images are distressing: dead bodies on the roads and in mass graves, homes, schools, hospitals, and other civilian infrastructure destroyed and reportedly left mined. President, Russia is desperate to hide the truth about the war, but atrocities must be investigated and those responsible must be brought to justice. In this respect, we welcome the establishment by the Human Rights Council of a commission of inquiry on Ukraine to investigate all alleged violations of international humanitarian law and human rights law. And we also welcome that the ICC has opened an investigation into the situation in Ukraine. We urge Russia and everyone holding evidence to fully cooperate with these investigations. We cannot allow there to be impunity for war crimes being committed in Ukraine. The world is watching. President, Russia's unprovoked and illegal war against Ukraine, a free and sovereign country, is also an attack on democratic values and on freedom. It is a blatant violation of international law and the very principles of the UN Charter. And as the Secretary General underlined this morning, this Council has a responsibility. We must do everything in our power to end the war and to mitigate its impact. Let me repeat the message by the Norwegian Prime Minister Støre gave to President Putin when they spoke on Thursday. He urged him to cease the hostilities and emphasized that Russia must ensure rapid, safe, and unimpeded humanitarian access to the civilian population, particularly in Mariupol. He stressed also the need to find a negotiated solution to end the war. President, the suffering is widespread. Russia's war is causing the largest humanitarian crisis in Europe since the Second World War. A quarter of the Ukrainian population has now been displaced, and cluster munition will continue to maim and kill long after the conflict has ended. The reconstruction, when it comes, will take years. Ukraine has been set back decades in its economic development, and the consequences of this war will be felt by generations of Ukrainians. Russia's war is also being felt globally, exacerbating other humanitarian crises and causing a serious negative effect on the agricultural sector with a global rise in food insecurity and increased prices of fuel and fertilizers. President, before concluding, let me be very clear. Russia must abide by international law. It must comply with the order of the International Court of Justice to immediately suspend this military operation and to withdraw its troops from Ukraine. The killing and destruction must end. Russia must stop its illegal war. Thank you.
The representative of Norway for her statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Ghana.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I congratulate the UAE for its successful presidency in the preceding month and wish you and the UK delegation the very best for this month. Let me begin by thanking the Secretary General for his statement to the Council and welcoming the briefings of USG Rosemary DiCarlo and USG and Emergency Relief Coordinator Martin Griffiths on the prevailing situation in Ukraine and the coordinated humanitarian response of the United Nations agencies in the face of difficult operational challenges on the ground. I also welcome the virtual participation in this meeting of the President of Ukraine, His Excellency, Mr. Volodymyr Zelensky. My delegation has taken careful note of the Ukrainian President's remark, noted his country's steadfast commitment to peace, and encouraged the path of dialogue and diplomacy in finding a settlement of this needless war. Madam President, the prolongation of the war in Ukraine continues to be a situation of deep concern for Ghana. We are particularly disturbed by the increasing humanitarian cost arising from the unjustified aggression by the Russian Federation against Ukraine. We have observed with pain the unbridled bombardment of civilian populated areas as well as civilian and other critical infrastructure without regard to the customary norms of international law and the principles of international humanitarian law relating to armed conflict. Ghana is gravely concerned by the reports of alleged gross violations of international humanitarian law and international criminal law since the onset of the invasion, including emerging reports and images of human rights violations and the killings of civilians in Mariupol, Chernihiv, Kharkiv, and areas on the outskirts of Kyiv, such as Bucha. We support the call by the Secretary General for an independent, impartial, and thorough investigations to establish the facts, gather the evidence, and to hold all perpetrators of such atrocious crimes accountable for their actions. The killing of children, the aged, medical personnel, humanitarian workers, and journalists are deplorable, and we condemn all such acts unreservedly. We urge restraint on all sides and re-emphasize the urgency of an unconditional cessation of hostilities nationwide to enable the evacuation and safe passage of civilians and facilitate the delivery of life-saving aid to the people in the cities that remain under siege. Humanitarian agencies require unobstructed access to reach people in need of food, water, and medicine and other critical supplies, and all parties must guarantee such access. The ravages of both the global COVID-19 pandemic and the situation in Ukraine demonstrates the interconnectedness and interdependence of states and reinforce the need for a unified international response in support of the path of dialogue and diplomacy. Madam President, we have followed closely the direct negotiations between the conflicting parties and note the progress made in the fourth round of consultations which took place in Istanbul on 29th of March 2022. To sustain the negotiations, we urge a restraint in the ongoing hostilities and a follow-through of the expressed commitments to resolve the security concerns of the parties. In furtherance of the efforts of the parties, the Council must at this time focus attention on supporting confidence-building measures that facilitate a negotiated settlement of the immediate conflict and the wider question of European security on the basis of international law and other internationally agreed frameworks. The convergence of the parties and the international community on these matters would be the only way to end the tensions, bridge the differences between the parties, and forge a unified position on the situation in Ukraine. I thank you for your kind attention.
I thank the representative of Ghana for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the United Arab Emirates.
Thank you, Madam President, and I'd like to join others in congratulating you and your team for assuming the presidency and wishing you a productive month.
Like the video if you guys haven't, share the stream.
The Secretary General, the Undersecretary General for Political and Peacebuilding Affairs, and the Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and the Emergency Relief Coordinator for their helpful briefings. We also thank President Zelensky for his address to this Council. We have once again heard in this Council deeply sobering and concerning reports from the ground, including from Martin Griffiths and Rosemary DiCarlo. And with every meeting, the Council is reminded of the rapidly deteriorating humanitarian situation on the ground in Ukraine. 1/4 of the country's population have fled their homes. And the rising death toll and the destruction of critical civilian infrastructure are a grim reflection of the tragic human cost of war. The images coming out of Bucha and other towns and cities are shocking. The alleged crimes they entail are of the utmost gravity, And first and foremost, as others have said, we must establish what has happened here with the cooperation of all parties. It is imperative that we do not get caught up in a war of narratives in addition to the conflict that is ongoing. Indeed, we need to allow for the existing mechanisms to investigate the facts on the ground impartially so that justice for all victims can be served, and we acknowledge the Secretary General's call for that independent investigation, as well as last week's appointment of the members of the Human Rights Council's Independent International Commission of Inquiry on Ukraine. As we enter the 6th week of conflict, we believe that an immediate cessation of hostilities throughout Ukraine is imperative to move towards a peaceful solution to the war in Ukraine. And we take note of efforts to reach a diplomatic resolution to the conflict, and we see the ongoing negotiations and the several rounds of negotiations between Russia and Ukraine as a very positive development. We remain hopeful that these efforts at the negotiating table can urgently translate into de-escalation on the ground, and we urge others to support these efforts. We also welcome the readout from Mr. Griffiths on his meetings with senior Russian officials, as well as his upcoming meetings with Ukrainian officials. Establishing a viable humanitarian ceasefire could be a stepping stone for broader negotiations and eventually a sustainable peace. However, until a cessation of hostilities is achieved, the priority must be to work towards protecting and alleviating the suffering of civilians. And in addition to the points we made during the last Council meeting on Ukraine on 29th March, I want to focus here on 4 additional points for the Council's consideration. First, as others have done, we all need to continue to reaffirm the need for all parties to abide by their obligations under international humanitarian law, in particular the protection of civilians and the respect for the principles of distinction and proportionality that are paramount in conflict. Second, the difficulties in providing relief and humanitarian access need to be addressed immediately and can be addressed quickly. It's critical to find either local or broad-based agreements for security guarantees to allow for the safe provision of humanitarian assistance and for civilians to voluntarily evacuate safely. And these are initial confidence-building measures that can be developed down the line and should also be encouraged, including the proposals left by Mr. Griffiths with the government in Moscow. Third, as the ICRC has noted, false narratives and disinformation has the potential to cause real harm for humanitarian organizations on the ground. The use of digital technologies that amplify the spread of harmful information, including misinformation, disinformation, and hate speech, is a true challenge in conflict zones. And these phenomena are not new, but technology has greatly increased the scale and speed at which harmful information reaches target audiences online. And this is particularly concerning in crisis settings where information can influence the dynamics and behavior on the ground and can put communities and humanitarian responders at risk. Fourth, at a time of conflict, protecting civilians, of course, must be our top priority. However, we should not forget the impact that war has on a nation's cultural heritage and identity. We're concerned by UNESCO's recent report on the dozens of cultural sites that have been damaged in Ukraine since the conflict began. We know from our experience in the Middle East that protection of cultural sites is critical to rebuilding peace. And in moments of violence and turmoil, cultural sites are essential cornerstones for collective memory and a foundation for future reconciliation. We therefore call on all parties to refrain from the unlawful destruction of cultural heritage and to think about what comes next after the war concludes for the people living there and how they go about building peace. Before I end, allow me to take a moment to reflect on what others have commented on, including the Secretary General, and that is the devastating impact of the conflict on food security worldwide. And we're alarmed by these figures shared by the Secretary General just now on how the war is affecting some of the most vulnerable communities around the world. 1.2 billion people in 47 developing countries are at risk due to rising food prices. And food shortages are aggravating situations already on this Council's agenda, and these shortages are felt in other settings where high prices of basic commodities can lead to further unrest and instability, not just in this part of the world, but around the globe. So we look forward to seeing the UN Global Crisis Response Group on Food, Energy and Finance address these issues and offer it our full support. And let us not forget that the effects of this war are hitting communities that are still reeling from the global COVID-19 pandemic. And these vulnerabilities are further exacerbated by reduced domestic food production due to the rising costs and scarcity of chemical fertilizers and pesticides. And the knock-on effects, including global conflicts, will be grave, and the Council must stay focused on all of them. Unless we do something to end this conflict now, it will continue to drive suffering and instability worldwide in the coming months and years, and the world simply cannot afford this, and the Security Council should do its part to stop this conflict and to help parties come and reach a peaceful solution. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Arab Emirates for her statement, and I will now make a statement in my capacity as the representative of the United Kingdom. President Zelensky, by video, Secretary General, colleagues, the United Nations was created in the wake of a European war of aggression that laid waste to Europe and engulfed the world. All of us who signed the UN Charter committed to ending the scourge of war, to fundamental human rights, the dignity and worth of the human person, the equal rights of nations large and small, to justice and respect for international law. Yet now, we're facing another war of aggression in Europe. We've heard today, again, the devastating impact of Russia's unilateral and illegal military action in Ukraine, its impact on surrounding countries and the region, and on the security and prosperity of the wider world as it seeks to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. Thousands killed, millions displaced, cities razed to the ground, hospitals bombed, citizens cut off from food, water, and medicine, blockaded seaports, and the rapid increase in wheat prices, pressure on already stretched humanitarian resources. And now, as Russia is forced into retreat from areas around Kyiv, the brutality of the invasion is laid bare. We've all seen the horrific images from the towns of Bucha and Irpin of civilians deliberately killed in areas from which Russian forces have recently withdrawn, and the video we saw earlier underlined that horror. These acts and other credible incidents must be investigated as war crimes, and the UK fully supports the work of the International Criminal Court and the work of the Ukrainian Prosecutor General and other national prosecutors. Colleagues, as we and so many others have said so many times, all of this could be stopped if the Russian Federation ended this war now. I resume my function as President of the Council. The representative of the Russian Federation has asked for the floor to make a further statement.
Thank you, Madam President. I know that this does not bring us closer to the end of today's meeting, but since today's topic is extremely important, I think it's essential to say a few words about what was the reason for this meeting, which we didn't have a chance to say yesterday because we were not given a chance to have a separate meeting of the Security Council on this topic. And unfortunately, yesterday's meeting, in any way possible, our Western colleagues tried to kind of sweep it under the carpet, and we have seen an example of how of the new new rules-based order. I would like to once again focus on the events in Bucha, which became the premise for conducting today's meeting and has led to some far-reaching conclusions that many of you have already made. All units of the Russian armed forces fully withdrew from Bucha as a gesture of good faith on the 30th of March. The very next day, after a round of negotiations between Russia and Ukraine in Turkey, in the presence of negotiators. Now, a report about this was published that very same day on an official website of the Russian Defense Ministry. During the time that the town was under the control of the Russian armed forces, not a single civilian suffered from any kind of violence. People were able to move around freely around the town and use their cell phones.
No way.
Furthermore, the towns of the Kyiv Oblast was the Russian army supplied 450 tons of humanitarian assistance to those cities. This was confirmed. Now, the towns, the Russian army did not prevent people from leaving the towns. All inhabitants could freely leave the towns toward the north. At the same time, the southern areas of Bucha, including residential areas, were shelled round the clock by Ukrainian forces from using heavy caliber weapons, tanks, and mortars. Already after the withdrawal of the Russian forces, the mayor of Bucha, Anatoly Fedoruk, in his video statement on the 31st of March, presented this as a heroic liberation of the city by the Ukrainian armed forces. Now, let's set aside its so-called liberation, and let's focus on the fact that he confirmed the fact on the 31st of March that there
Where's
were
Will
no
Smith when you need him?
soldiers
Hey,
in
where's Will Smith?
On the 31st of March. The mayor did not mention any local inhabitants with their hands tied and having been shot.
Ukraine out your...
I mean, could you believe that the mayor would not have noticed on the streets, as reported, of 280 corpses? He wouldn't have noticed that? On the 1st of April, the deputy of the council, Yekaterina Ukraintseva, the deputy of council of Bucha, in a 2-minute video, warned several times the local residents that representatives of the Ukrainian security forces have entered the town and are conducting a mop-up operation, and she's asking everyone to be very careful. Now, on social media, you can also find an almost 8-minute video about the announced mop-up of Bucha by the Ukrainian National Police on the 2nd of April. On that video, there are no bodies of civilians on the streets. Furthermore, on that video, the National Guard of Ukraine also interviews local residents who didn't mention any corpses or mass shootings. On one of the Ukrainian news sites, there was also a warning posted on the upcoming mop-up of Bucha on the 2nd of April from a mop-up of Russian collaborators. Now that's been deleted, but users were able to save that video. Now, testimony, so-called testimony of crimes, or evidence of crimes by the Russian armed forces in Bucha appeared only on the 3rd of April, on the 4th day after the Russian forces left the town. Once again, without any evidence based on the presumption of guilt, the Russian army is being accused of some kind of evil deeds. Now, of course, we could not notice how these Ukrainian videos were taken up by Western media and human rights organizations who claim to be impartial, and the clear inconsistency between the Ukrainian version and the actual facts is clear. If the corpses of civilians had been out in the open several days, they would have had several signs that were well known to forensic specialists.
Literally.
And our Western colleagues don't seem to be bothered by that.
They're on the satellite image.
The New York Times would go further by stating that the corpses were there on the street since the 20th of March. Can you imagine what kind of state they would have been in?
Oh, my God.
Furthermore, many of the bodies in the videos circulated by the Ukraine had white bands, armbands on. These are armbands that were worn by civilians after the entry of the Russian armed forces into the town. And one of the videos posted by Ukrainian radicals, you could hear a call to shoot anyone who doesn't have blue arm bands on. That video during the mop-up of Bucha was posted by a member of the territorial defense battalion to whom the Ukrainian authorities handed out weapons. Furthermore, the member of the city council of Bucha, who I mentioned, Yekaterina Ukraintseva, stated on the website Medusa that she did not see the Russian forces.
Notice how he said that there wasn't any bodies, and now he's describing the bodies.
Confirms that
he's double speaking, like
armed forces that are most of the violations. Of course, these are details that have not been mentioned in the presentations of our Western and Ukrainian colleagues. However, Ukrainian President Zelensky is already claiming that all these staged events in Bucha have give the Ukrainians the right for an uncivilized response. Well, we can just imagine what that is, based on how Ukrainian radicals behaved in the east of Ukraine. Many testimonials of their crimes are shocking. Unfortunately, Ukrainian experts on disinformation and staging do not intend to stop there. As the Ministry of Defense claimed, based on confirmed information in the evening of the 4th of April in the town of Moshun, 23 kilometers to the northwest of Kyiv, troops from the 72nd Ukrainian Main Center of Psychological Operations conducted another staged video of so-called killing by Russian troops of civilians for future
stage video we watched
media.
Man.
These kinds of activities have been carried out by in Suma and
Moschun is the city with the pine tree, the little tree with the white picket fence in the middle.
Western colleagues,
that little town that we went on Google Maps.
That what you're doing by fueling anti-Russian hysteria every single day. So we are assuming that there will be further horrible provocations similar to the one in Bucha. New attempts to discredit Russian soldiers and to present them as murderers and rapists.
So that means that we're going to be seeing more images similar to Bucha from other cities that Russian forces have been in.
Of course,
they project their own actions.
And the fact that modern technologies today make it possible to create any video. We watched a video today presented by the Ukrainian side. Today, already the Ukraine is full of in fact, information refuting what was in the video, stating that it wasn't filmed in the right place with not the right people. And just a few words to my American colleague, who declared a crusade to exclude Russia from the Human Rights Council. This is stated by the representative of a country who 3 years ago criticized the Council in the strongest, harshest terms that it had the audacity of condemning the actions of American soldiers in Afghanistan. And as is well known, the United States left the Council. So I hope that our colleagues from the United Nations will not allow themselves to be manipulated and play up to Washington and its very dangerous games. Thank you very much.
Man, yuck. Well,
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for his statement. The representative of Ukraine has asked for the floor to make a further statement.
Well, thank you, Madam President. Before I switch to English, I would say a couple of lines rather. Мы уже привыкли.
We have become accustomed to the lies that are constantly being spewed in the chamber of the Security Council. Comrade Nebenzia decided to quote from an interview from a media outlet called Meduza. I'd like to ask Comrade Nebenzia, excuse me, why he doesn't quote the interview in full. Let me quote that interview, who the representative of Putin wanted to use for his purposes.
For his media. It's all for the media.
I'm quoting. These are the words of the woman who he mentioned, and I'm quoting. Sometimes Russian soldiers gave dry rations to the basement, and then after lowering these rations, they tossed grenades into the basement. You wanted to quote that interview. Why didn't you quote the whole interview?
Damn.
This is about your humanitarian assistance, after you provide that humanitarian assistance, you toss grenades. That's an interview from the same woman who you mentioned.
I would like to make my further statement in response to the hypocritical questions by Putin's representative. After the video we saw with the shocking images from Bucha, Irpin,
that video almost made me puke, dude.
And other sites.
That video is not good.
He should ask these very questions to himself. How have Russians got to the cruelty of Nazis? When have you started enjoying acting like Nazis? Killing civilians, attempting to redraw internationally recognized borders, setting the task to finally resolve the Ukrainian issue, like Hitler attempted to resolve the Jewish issue. When did you miss the point of Russia's turning into the Nazi-style cancerous tumor? Unable and unwilling to stop expanding and bringing to neighboring nations sufferings, destruction, pain, and death. I'm appalled over your cynical and outright lie that you don't hit civilian targets, and that is why you're moving so slowly. You hit the civilian targets and you kill the civilians. Shall I quote your own words of yesterday in the press conference that you gave here in the headquarters? where you said that civilians are killed by your army. Or shall I not? Shall I play the video? You said this is a war. Civilians are killed in the war. It's a warfare, you said. Or perhaps in your mindset, a children's hospital in Mykolaiv, destroyed by the Russian strike yesterday, was a military target. And perhaps a child killed as a result of the strike was a Ukrainian nationalist. The only truth you've said is that you are not moving as planned. And the only reason is the resistance of the Ukrainian army and the Ukrainian people, not your smart military planning. The Ukrainian people who realize quite clear what the Russian world in reality means. And we thank the international community for the solidarity with Ukraine. Ukraine will win in its territory, and the entire world will win, despite the threats that a criminal and a liar throws in the face just in the Security Council chamber. Finally, if there is anything that we have to thank the Russian representative for, it is his acknowledgement at yesterday's press conference that Russia is waging war against Ukraine. War, you said several times, not the special operation.
Got him.
And I consider this confession shall impact the UN assessment of what is going on in the center of Europe. Perhaps it was the unique moment when we should believe what a fully accredited representative says in the United Nations. Hence, once again, a reminder to Putin's diplomats. Ribbentrop denied any knowledge of concentration camps, racial extermination policies, yet was found guilty at Nuremberg war crime trial. And we all know what happened to him on the 16th of October, 1946. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Ukraine for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Oleh Synehubov, the head of delegation of the European Union to the United Nations.
Interesting.
Thank you, Madam President. I address the Security Council on behalf of the European Union and its member states. North Macedonia, Montenegro and Albania, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Iceland and Liechtenstein, Republic of Moldova, Georgia, Monaco and San Marino all aligned themselves with this statement. And I wanted to start by congratulating you, Madam President, for the United Kingdom for assuming the presidency for the month of April and for convening this meeting and for inviting us to speak and also acknowledge the presidency of March of the United Arab Emirates. I want to thank the Secretary General, Under Secretary Generals Di Carlo and Griffiths for their presentations, and I want to express our full support, solidarity and respect for the heroic people of Ukraine as embodied by the message this morning by President Zelensky. Madam President, 41 days ago, Russia decided to wage a war of aggression against Ukraine in blatant violation of international law, the principles of the UN Charter and of the acquis of the OSCE, an affront to the rules-based order and to the global security and stability. And we have heard and seen again today the tremendous cost to the people of Ukraine. The dramatic consequences of Russia's war of choice are well known. Thousands of lives have been lost. Over 11 million people, most of them women and children, have been forced to leave their homes. Over 500 schools and 52 hospitals have been shelled. Entire cities have been razed to the ground. The unfolding drama in Mariupol and the images from Bucha stain our common humanity. Russia must stop this senseless act of violence. The EU condemns in the strongest terms Russia's unjustified and unprovoked war of aggression against Ukraine. We demand that Russia immediately stop its military aggression, immediately and unconditionally withdraw all forces from the entire territory of Ukraine, and fully respect Ukraine's territorial integrity, sovereignty, and independence within its internationally recognized borders, as demanded by the United Nations General Assembly. We condemn in the strongest possible terms the reported atrocities committed by the Russian armed forces in a number of occupied Ukrainian towns. Haunting images of massacres with large numbers of civilian deaths and casualties, as well as destruction of civilian infrastructure, show the true face of Russia's brutal war of aggression. These massacres will be inscribed in the list of atrocities committed by Russia on European soil. The Russian authorities are responsible for these crimes committed while they had effective control of the area. They are subject to the international law of occupation. Russia is directing attacks against the civilian population and is targeting civilian objects, including hospitals, medical facilities, schools, and shelters. These war crimes must stop immediately. Those responsible will be held to account in accordance with international law. We welcome the International Court of Justice's provisional measures ordering Russia to suspend military operations immediately. We fully support the investigation launched by the Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court into war crimes and crimes against humanity, as well as the work of the Independent Commission of Inquiry. The EU is assisting the Ukrainian Prosecutor General and civil society in the collection and preservation of evidence of the war crimes. It is clear there must be and there will be accountability. The EU and its member states are providing shelter for the more than 4 million refugees that fled Russia's violence. They do so regardless of nationality, ethnicity, religion, or race. We have adopted sanctions against the Russian government, its financial and defense sectors, and those individuals enabling and financing the aggression. We have committed significant funding to the UN Humanitarian Flash Appeal and regional refugee response plans for Ukraine. So far, the EU and its member states have mobilized over 1.1 billion euros in emergency aid. This comes on top of the 2.4 million euros in humanitarian emergency and early recovery assistance the EU and its member states have provided to Ukraine since 2014. In the largest ever operation under the EU Civil Protection Mechanism, 29 countries, all EU member states together with Norway and Turkey, have responded to the request for assistance from Ukraine. As of 4th of April, over 13,000 tons of medicines, hospital equipment, ambulances and firefighter equipment, food and energy supplies have arrived in Ukraine. European leaders have set up a Ukraine Solidarity Trust Fund to channel support to post-war reconstruction. And at the pledging event on 9th of April with Canada, we will further showcase that we stand in words and deeds with the courageous people of Ukraine. Madam President, after the Security Council was unable to take action, the General Assembly demonstrated once again less than 2 weeks ago the overwhelming international rejection of the Russian aggression and an overwhelming support to addressing the humanitarian crisis in Ukraine. The international community demanded safe and unhindered passage for civilians fleeing violence, as well as humanitarian access to those in need. International humanitarian law must be respected. The dramatic consequences of Russia's war against Ukraine are not limited to Europe. They are global. Ukrainian farmers are prevented from sowing as a result of Russian shelling. Ships filled with wheat are blocked in Black Sea ports by Russian military forces. As a result, food prices have rocketed, pushing people into poverty and threatening to destabilize entire regions. The poorest countries, as we've heard, are the most vulnerable to shocks in food prices. All this is a direct result of the war, despite Russia's cynical attempts to shift the blame. Madam President, the EU and its member states are fully mobilized to end the war in line with international law and the UN Charter. But at the same time, crises the world over need our urgent attention. The EU will continue to provide humanitarian and development support to our partner countries from North Africa to the Middle East and from Sub-Saharan Africa to Asia. We are scaling up our multilateral action to provide support to countries with acute food insecurity and are committed to keeping global trade routes open so agricultural staples can feed the world. the EU has pledged 2.5 billion euros for international cooperation related to nutrition for the period 2021 to 2024. We also fully support the work of the UN to deliver and scaling up humanitarian assistance, protect refugees, and work towards a ceasefire. With a particular focus on food security, we will contribute to the work of the Global Crisis Response Group to deal with the global social and economic effects of the war. We heard your recommendations this morning, Secretary General, and we have already launched a strategy for safeguarding food security and reinforcing the resilience of food systems backed by increased assistance. Madam President, once again, we call on Russia to cease the destruction of innocent life across Ukraine and immediately and unconditionally withdraw all its troops. We call for an immediate ceasefire, safe passage to civilians trapped in war zones, and uninterrupted humanitarian access. We stand in solidarity with the people of Ukraine and all other people affected by the war of Russian aggression. We stand in support of Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, and we will continue to work diligently with the UN and our partners to end this aggression and address the humanitarian needs. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Skog for his statement. I also acknowledge the written statement submitted by the delegation of Poland earlier before the meeting, and also from the 8 Nordic Baltic countries. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.
That's it? What the hell, dude? What happened? What, like, okay. Do they vote, or is there going to be a vote? That was just an emergency meeting then, just to keep sharing what we all know. Even in the comments here, so what was the point of that? Like the comments on the United Nations stream. Thoughts and prayers. Thoughts and prayers. That's it. They're putting the screen up. That's it. The vote is tomorrow. Okay. What time? Same time? Well, I'll be live at 9 in the morning tomorrow. So that's it from the council today. Hopefully there will be a vote or something tomorrow. All right, let's see what the latest is. Got about another half hour. It seems that today is the International Day for the Expulsion of Russian Diplomats. Well, welcome everybody. Welcome, welcome. We just tuned into the UN Security Council emergency session. We heard from a bunch of different world leaders, including Russia and Ukraine, and the president of Ukraine had stopped in and gave some words. We saw a very, very graphic video that the president of Ukraine wanted to show the UN Security Council. And then Russia refuted all of it, said none of it was true, but they double speak everything. They give away, if you haven't noticed, Russia gives away what they're doing by saying what they're not doing. Everything they say that they're not doing, they are. It's so childish. It sounds like who could believe this? Who could believe this after all this time and seeing Russia just lie blatantly? But it's just because people that have different ideologies are kind of unified, and people that go against the grain just to go against the grain, or the just asking questions crowd. When the just asking questions crowd gets answers, they don't want the answers. They want to just keep asking questions to keep their whatever dichotomy they're in dumb or ignorant. Or if they have followers, they want to keep their followers dumb and ignorant, because then they can make money off of them, because it's profitable to keep people ignorant and dumb. Very profitable, unfortunately. That is a reality of life. All right, let's tune back in and see what the latest is. It seems that today is the International Day for the Expulsion of Russian Diplomats. Romania has declared 10 employees of the Russian embassy persona non grata. Along with other countries, Slovenia is expelling 33 Russian diplomats today. So that's going on today. And they haven't told one truth at all. Not a single time. Hopefully the vote will be tomorrow. Our vote, though, we have a poll going. I asked, do you feel negotiations with Putin are possible? And 87% of you guys said no on YouTube, and on Facebook 93% say no. So 93% on Facebook say no, and 87% on YouTube say no. So the overwhelming majority do not believe that negotiations with Vladimir Putin and the Kremlin are possible. All right, let's see the latest. Let's check the list. What is this? Video of Ukrainian T-64 BV tank engaging a Russian convoy. This was posted 17 minutes ago. So they're putting even the flags above the vehicles. So you can see this is a Russian column, Russian convoy here, and you got Ukrainian forces over here in the farmland. Wow. Wow. Holy shit. Look at how ate up their convoy is too. Like look at this, that vehicle is, oh my goodness. They don't even know how, oh my god, look at all their soldiers are right there. Oh, they're on the ground? Another example of Russians not knowing what the hell. Look at, they're all bunched up right here. Another convoy ambush video of them getting destroyed. Okay. I was showing what was happening in Bucha, but we're going back to the policy of if there's any human beings from the war that I'm not going to show it. But the footage coming out of Bucha, like that, there was so many, especially people with check marks, blue checks now on Twitter, and people that are voice boxes for Russian propaganda now apparently. Just do not believe that this is real. So showing the footage from Bucha has hopefully invigorated that and changed that. So let's go back here. So you got Ukrainian forces in the farm here, in the farmland. They take out a vehicle here. Just fuck it, leave that vehicle. They have ground troops like walking alongside of it, running. They're taking fire from this house here. This is a big ambush. They're inside. There's military inside of here. You can see the tracer rounds coming from it. They're engaging targets here inside of the building. They're getting hit from both sides. Again, this is a Russian convoy. Look at their spacing. This is terrible. This vehicle's way too close here. One hit, one well-placed mortar will take out both of these vehicles. 2 for 1. They clearly don't have any training for react to contact, especially in a convoy element. This vehicle, what is this vehicle doing up here? What's this one doing? Is this a scout vehicle? It's just sitting still? Sitting there waiting for the rest of them to catch up, or what? And now the lead vehicle started moving again. These two are bunched up. There's just easy. There's all their soldiers that are just dismounted while this convoy is getting engaged. Man, it's wild seeing a convoy and dismounted, like, you have is that a mechanized infantry unit? And you got this, you had that many ground troops running alongside of it. Look at how many there were. Look at that. It's probably like 100. It could be like 100 troops right here, between in here and along the line. You gotta be careful. Yeah, definitely a complex ambush. So you can see the tracer rounds coming out. So there's a unit, a Ukrainian unit inside of this 2-story complex right here. They're hitting them from the top floor and the bottom floor. See, can you guys see the tracer rounds coming out of the building? They start coming out right now. Where is this? I wonder if we'll have a better video with a location and we can find the street that this is on. Here's in Borodyanka in the Kyiv region of Ukraine. Borodyanka. Like the video if you guys haven't. Thank you so much for choosing Mercado Media Productions to tune in. Coverage at 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. Monday through Friday. Just 9 a.m. It's 9 a.m. on Fridays and then 9 p.m. on Saturdays, or 9. Saturdays I'll have to post a update for you guys if I'm streaming or not, because I have softball tournaments. But I'll do the best I can for Saturdays, but definitely Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. every day. And then 9 p.m. of course for most of our audience is tuned in for the 9 p.m. slot. Ukrainian farmer with a captured Russian BMD-4M. So here's another farmer tractor video pulling a, what is this again now? BMD-4M. One more time.
Доброго вечора, ми з України.
Right there. Fucking John Deere, baby. John Deere, baby. Oh my goodness. Wow. This is from Andrew Kimmel reporting. He's gone viral. He went viral yesterday, or 2 days ago, for calling out some of the people that are perpetuating the nonsense propaganda. So, what's this story here? Earlier this week, we received a request from a woman in PA that her 97-year-old mother was stuck in a nursing home in Kyiv. Through our network and our individual volunteers, a driver transporting people from Kharkiv agreed to get her and pass her over to me at the Polish border.
Good morning, everyone. It is very early, but I'm about to start a 3-hour journey to the border where I'll be picking up a 97-year-old Ukrainian woman and driving her to Warsaw. It's going to be a long day.
Go follow Kimmel on Twitter at Andrew Kimmel. Transporting a 97-year-old out of a war zone in a van was an incredibly difficult task. The only way they could get her in comfortably was to have her lay down. She was unable to move for the entirety of the 10-hour trip, of which they drove through the night. 28 hours from Kharkiv. So she came from Kharkiv. And if anybody's been tuning in for the last month, this is one of the most war-torn, bombed-out cities. I mean, Mariupol, Kharkiv, Chernihiv, Bucha, Irpin, Gostomel over here. Those are the hardest hit cities and towns. So she came from one of the worst of the war zone. I took a team of people to get her out of the van as she was in pain and was incredibly nervous as everything going on. We had a medical team give her a checkup after a bowl of soup and tea. Nanel, born in 1925, became much more relaxed and comfortable. Yes, Andrew Kim was there. The original plan was to get Nanel to a nursing home in Warsaw, but the idea of putting her in my car for another 5-hour journey would be too much. The medical team in the Korskova border was able to find a bed at a nursing home an hour and 45 minutes away. We were immediately greeted by these amazing women at the nursing home who immediately put Nanel at ease. One of the women cried upon hearing how old she was and the journey she had taken to get there. 97 years old. 97 years old. Nanel's daughter is booking the earliest flight to Poland to finally reunite with her mom.
Да, меняемся чаще, а вспоминаем, меняемся редко, а встречаемся чаще, только встречаемся. Любим просматривать. Да, меняемся чаще, а вспоминаем, меняемся редко, а встречаемся чаще, только встречаемся. Любим просматривать.
Nanel used to work for the Ukrainian president and parliament from the 70s to the 90s. The nurses told me she was upset she couldn't curl her hair before leaving, as seen prior to the war. Looking forward to more curls and smiles from Nanel when she and her daughter reunite. Something worth adding, one of the volunteers who helped Nanel give Nanel a medical check, who acted as a translator and who came with me to bring her to the nursing home, was a refugee herself. She escaped from Mariupol. Again, Mariupol's down here. The last city left that's not under Russian occupation, but the entire city's been bombed and faced artillery fire. So update, with the help of our network of volunteers, Nanel's daughter arrived from the United States. I took her to see her mom. So here is the latest update and her daughter reuniting with her mom.
Yeah. Oh my goodness, that's a long way. Мамочка, привет, это Наташа. Это Наташа, мамочка, ты узнаешь меня? Узнаешь? Мамочка, узнаешь меня? Узнаешь? Это Наташа, узнаешь меня, да, золотко, да?
Но мы соединиться с вами сможем?
Конечно, мы же соединяемся, я тебя заберу к себе.
Ну вот.
Конечно, конечно. Слышишь меня? Это я, это Наташа, ты узнаешь меня? Да?
Ничего.
Наташа, твоя дочка. Наташа, твоя дочка.
Ну, Наташа.
Да.
Что ты хочешь?
Нет, я говорю, что я тебя заберу к себе, солнышко, моя ласточка. Моя хорошая, приехала за тобой.
Да, я же не знаю, когда они идут и куда идут.
Ничего, не волнуйся, все будет хорошо. Хорошо, хорошо, очень рада тебя видеть.
Хорошо.
Поверить не могу, поверить не могу.
Спасибо.
Конечно, конечно.
No idea what they're saying, but you can totally, I mean, you can You feel it? What's going on? One more time.
Oh my goodness, it's a long way. Мамочка, привет, это Наташа. Это Наташа, мамочка, ты узнаешь меня? Узнаешь? Мамочка, узнаешь меня? Узнаешь? Это Наташа, узнаешь меня, да, золотко, да?
Но мы соединиться с вами сложно.
Конечно, мы же соединяемся, я тебя заберу к себе.
Ну вот.
Конечно, конечно. Слышишь меня? Это я, это Наташа, ты узнаешь меня? Да?
Ничего.
Наташа, твоя дочка. Наташа, твоя дочка.
Ну, Наташа.
Да.
Что ты хочешь?
Нет, я говорю, что я тебя заберу к себе, солнышко, моя ласточка. Моя хорошая, приехала за тобой.
Да, я ж не знаю, когда они идут и куда идут.
Ничего, не волнуйся, все будет хорошо. Хорошо, хорошо, очень рада тебя видеть.
Хорошо.
Поверить не могу, поверить не могу.
Спасибо.
Конечно, конечно.
All right, full credit to Andrew Kimmel for that reporting. Things got even better once the facility found a hearing aid for her.
Молодец, молодец. Ты меня слышишь, хорошо? Ну и все, браво. I asked if she can hear me. She said yes, and she smiled, so that's great. Молодец. Очень хорошо. Мамочка, я сейчас пойду Андрюшу провожу, и потом приду к тебе, хорошо?
Кого, Гриша?
Нет, Андрюшу.
Андрюша.
We have communication, honey. She said, Grisha. I said, Андрюша. Мам, помаши ручкой. Андрюша, помаши ручкой, Андрюша.
So again, they found a hearing aid. So she's 97 years old. They got her out of Kharkiv, which is, again, one of the worst cities in Ukraine for war right now. The amount of destruction and civilian casualties among the worst cities.
We hear each other so. Молодец, молодец. Ты меня слышишь, хорошо? Ну и все, браво. I asked if she can hear me. She said yes, and she smiled, so that's great. Молодец. Очень хорошо. Мамочка, я сейчас пойду Андрюшу провожу, и потом приду к тебе, хорошо?
Кого, Гриша?
Нет, Андрюшу.
Андрюша.
We have communication, honey. She said, Grisha. I said, Андрюша. Мам, помаши ручкой. Андрюша, помаши ручкой, Андрюша.
All right. That's from Andrew Kimmel. He's been on the ground there. What's this here? My goodness, this must be another of all Freudian slips. So this is what the Ukrainian delegation was talking about. The corpses in the Bucha didn't exist before the Russian troops arrived, or left, sorry, before they left. The corpses in Bucha that didn't exist before the Russian troops arrived, or left, before they left.
What you see in Bucha, carefully at what you see in Bucha, about the corpses that lie on the streets, that were never existing before the Russian troops arrived, before they left. And suddenly they appear on the streets carefully.
Right. So this is what, I'm sure this is the press conference that he was talking about.
Carefully at what you see in Bucha, about the corpses that lie on the streets, that were never existing before the Russian troops arrived, before they left. And suddenly they appear on the streets carefully at what you see in Bucha.
So, a Chechen Arlen MRAP in Mariupol with a flat tire. Flat tires, flat as hell. That vehicle hasn't had any preventative maintenance done on it in forever. Breaking, the Israeli Foreign Minister Lapid accuses Russia of committing war crimes in Ukraine. I know, right? Finally. The images and testimony from Ukraine are horrific. Russian forces committed war crimes against defenseless civilian population. I strongly condemn these war crimes. I wish the Israeli foreign minister would condemn their own actions, but maybe that'll be a different conversation. But Israel is now condemning Russia. We don't need to see the video again, but we shared it if you missed it. Video of multiple destroyed Russian tanks, including one with a roof screen. Man, the camera moves so fast. Here's the tank right here. And on the road. Those that have served in the military. I mean, dude, I can't even... The United States military operates so much differently. Like, we have air support, so we don't have... Like, the convoy can talk directly to the air support, but, like, Russia clearly doesn't have that, so their convoys are just... Their convoys that they're running are just welcoming Bayraktar drone strikes. They're like, here we are. There's a big convoy element rolling through. We don't have any protection over this element, and they're just getting destroyed all the time. But I was going to ask if convoys are, if what we're watching now, I mean, we're seeing 4K satellite drone images and just watching these convoys get destroyed. Are convoys still effective? Are running military operational convoys still effective in war? Especially with how much the Russian forces, or excuse me, Ukrainian forces are able to engage these armor units with the rockets over shoulder, the NLAWs, the javelins, the Stugnas, all done, and a person can move around easier and maneuver quicker than a tank. But at the same time, we've got to take into account the United States military has, our convoys are, I mean, I don't know though. The United States was just in a war with a non-conventional force. They didn't have any of this technology. I wonder if you think about if the United States went into a war with a country that has this type of technology, would running convoys still be effective? They were effective in the Middle East because they didn't have the counter. They didn't have anything to counter them except for IEDs and ambushes. Here's another Stugna video. The Stugna P.
Now. Yeah! Сбыл! Давай, заражай!
Okay.
Выстрел!
Wait, is that a Wait, what is that? Oh, it's on a helicopter? I must have missed that part. I thought this was just another one. They hit a helicopter with it. That's a moving target. I forgot. Do Stugnas lock on? I thought it was just fire. It was just they hit a KA that looks like a KA-52. That's a helicopter. I haven't seen a Stugna hit a helicopter yet. Yo. They had to aim that thing. There it is. Move the camera up. You can see it right there. That camera was kind of down. You can see the helicopter in the video. The camera, it's right here. Here's the helicopter at the top of the screen. They zoom in. There it is. Here it is on the full video. All right. This is the KA-52 helicopter. Okay, it's a KA-52 Alligator. Yes. The dual rotors. They go the opposite way. But this is it right here. Look how far away you got to realize it's zoomed in this video, or through the screen. Is laser guided. They had to lead it. They had to lead it a little bit though. Look at. Was that KA-52 probably just doing reconnaissance and hovering? Why was the KA-52 just sitting still? Yeah. Wow. So that's the Stugna P. It works against helicopters as well. Destruction in the city of Chernobyl. So we're getting more pictures now because the Russian forces have been cleared. Let's see if I can pull it up here. Russian forces have been cleared from the north of Kyiv. Here it is. So you guys that have been tuned in the beginning of the war might remember it just being red right up here, up to Chernobyl, up here by the Chernihiv region, and those forces have been expelled. And now the Russian forces have moved back to the eastern region to try to bolster their forces here, right? So it's clear up here. So we're going to be, that's why the images of Bucha came out, because journalists and Ukrainian military are able to get up here now. It was a complete war zone over here. So the last journalists that were around the Irpin Bucha, you guys might remember the Sky News team. That Sky News team that was near Irpin when they got ambushed. So it has not been safe. Like, here's Kyiv. Here's Kiev. They have not been safe over here. So we're getting more photos. Now here's Chernobyl. There was no actual fighting due to the proximity. Well, that makes sense. Destruction in the city of Chernobyl caused by Putin regime terrorists. There was no actual fighting there due to the proximity of the remains of the conserved Chernobyl NPP. This is near the power plant. So that looks like a tank drove over it. Taking into account Kyiv's lack of interest in saving the lives of its servicemen, Mariupol will be liberated from nationalists by the armed forces of the Russian Federation and the DPR. So, likely going to be increased activity in Mariupol. I mean, there is every day. It's not like things take a break, but that's the one city down here that they don't have. Again, Russian forces, Russian occupied territory is the red. This is all inside of Ukraine. This is Crimea, which was annexed from Ukraine in 2014. Luhansk and Donetsk and the Donbass. And then Mariupol's down here, southeastern port city. The one city left. Join our Discord server if you guys haven't to continue the conversation. Join our Discord server. And then here is, so we did post this. We likely need to post this to our Facebook page. Mods. This one is an original video. So we've seen this a couple times, but here it is again. Ukrainian tank engages a Russian convoy, but it's more than just the tank. It's a complex ambush on this convoy. And we've seen it time and time again. This is how many videos of complex ambushes on Russian convoys, military, their soldiers, their ground troops, their whatever. It's just, this is another one. We're going to be wrapping up here soon. And then I'm going to be back live again at 9 p.m. Mercado on the 9s. Just remember that. Mercado on the 9s. 9 a.m., 9 p.m. 3 hours minimum. So that means we could go longer than 3 hours, right? But 3 hours minimum. But I'm not putting a time to a time, because if something's going on, obviously we're going to go later than that time. Like right now, we're going over some of the things that happen that are going on right now in Ukraine because the UN Security Council took up like 2 hours of the stream. So we're just going through some of this, and then we'll catch up anything else that happened throughout the day in the night stream. So also make sure you guys are following us on Twitter. Central Time, sorry. 9 a.m., 9 p.m. Central Time. I live in Minnesota. I'm right in the middle of the United States, so we're in the central time zone. We'll be building the dresser on Instagram. Okay, my bad. My bad. Don't need to see that. The other thing, if you're interested in, after this stream finishes, if you want to hang out more and learn more about the community, do I have am I logged in? Follow me on Instagram. I'm blocked from going live directly off of Facebook for 30 days. So you guys are going to have to follow me on Instagram to tune into live streams at the Guru Merc on Instagram, y'all. I'll be doing a Q&A talking about more of my thoughts from these streams. If you guys haven't noticed, I really try to just keep the news to these platforms, or what I'm doing for coverage. And I have a bunch of other side platforms for other content. If you guys are interested, you don't have to. If you're just here for the news, by all means. But if you guys are interested in hearing some of my opinions, a Q&A, you guys want to ask me more questions, it'll be a smaller audience, so I'll be able to interact with you guys more. But add me on Instagram. I'll go live here. All right. So that is it, y'all, for the morning coverage. Thank you so much for choosing Mercado Media Productions to tune in. I hope you guys have a wonderful afternoon. Consider following on Instagram. I'm also considering going live later. I'm going to be streaming some video games in between the coverage times. But again, it is 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. Central Time. Again, 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. Central Time. Make sure you guys are following. You guys are following the page. You guys are subscribed to the YouTube channel. Make sure you're following the Twitter page. All of that. All right. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Have a wonderful afternoon. I'll see you guys at 9 p.m. Central Time. Mercado on the 9s. Take care. you.